We have here the two negotiators that negotiated the Cyprus problem for many years. You guys said 95% of the solution is agreed. What has been agreed?
The Cyprus problem was divided into 6 main headings: governance and power sharing, territorial adjustment, property, economy, EU matters, and then security and guarantees. Regarding governance and power sharing, the United Cyprus would have a president and a vice president.
Like Vance and Trump.
The rotation would likely be for a 6-year period, 4-year Greek Cypriot president, 2-year Turkish Cypriot.
You don't think this will be a problem?
In a federation, you go beyond the idea that majority rules.
Because the minority would always be fucked.
Territorial adjustment was simple. There was a map. Turkish current border would be drawn towards north. So there was going to be a handover of territory to the Greek Cypriot side.
So remove the border completely.
Coming to property, immediately there was going to be a property commission established. It would act almost like a court.
Imagine how many billion are necessary in order to compensate all those dispossessed owners that will not be able to recover their properties.
Where do we find the money?
Money, or still we
The main issue under economy was how do we make sure that there is economic convergence between the both sides. We don't want one side to be permanently more rich.
What's the role of the European Union?
It's the best guarantee of objectivity and independence.
You said we need to be adapting all the regulations like every other European country.
Yes.
And now we're going to the elephant in the room, securities and guarantees. Dun, dun, dun.
We got stuck. In order to say more, we said we need to hear more on the first 5 paragraphs and engage in a give and take.
One of the first things we agreed was that the security of the one is not at the expense of the security of the other. Eventually, you cannot have any third country having right to interfere with internal affairs.
You would see start of withdrawal of troops.
With call for all the troops to be removed.
No, that was, don't rush.
We want to do in both communities a referendum to accept this solution.
It's not that what
is
we
necessary.
Want. This is not necessarily what we want.
It's the spirit and it's the political will. If it is there, all the remaining issues could have been resolved.
What unites us, it's much, much stronger than what divides us. Failure is not an option. Because if we fail, I don't want to think.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very, very special event. We have here in front of us the two negotiators that they negotiated the Cyprus problem for many years. And our goal with this conversation today, me personally, and I know a lot of Cypriots and many people around the world, would like to know for a lot of years of negotiation, it's been 50 years that we have this conflict. Ozdil will say more years that we have this conflict. What has been agreed? And I know you guys said most of the times, 95% of the things that it's kind of the Cyprus problem for the solution is agreed. So I want to really understand what is this 95% that was being agreed, how the next day of the solution looks like. The stage is yours. From the Turkish Cypriot community and from the Greek Cypriot community, Oζντίλ Ναμί and Mαυρογιάννης, Andrέas Mαυρογιάννης.
So this 95% is a figure of speech. It's not an exact number, but it just means that by Crown Montana, we were very close. And on most of the issues that we put on the table, we had either total convergence or very near to total convergence with some differences. But in order to give you an idea, what was initially done even before Andreas and myself started negotiating during the previous rounds of talks, the Cyprus problem was divided into 6 main headings: governance and power sharing, which was traditionally seen as the most important one, was
from both of the communities?
From both of the communities. So how the country will be run under a federal system. So that's governance and power sharing. Then there was the property issue, another chapter. Then there was economy. EU matters.
EU matters as a whole.
Has a different.
And that's the fourth.
That's the fourth. Then territorial adjustment. That's the fifth. The maps and everything. And then security and guarantees. So these were the 6 main headings. Under each heading, you would get subheadings. So, for example, under governance and power sharing, you would have how are we going to run the executive? Is it going to be presidential system? Is it going to be a parliamentary system? Then legislative body, okay? The parliament. Is it going to be just one house, or are you going to have a Senate and the lower house? How will people be elected there? How will decisions be taken? Then judiciary, the courts, public administration. How will people be employed within governmental departments? How will operations be run? Who will take decisions? What if there is a disagreement along communal lines? So on and so forth. So, subheadings like this. On property, okay, so we have to respect property rights, but events happened, division happened, population movement happened, people died. We have there, people who inherited property. How are we going to respect property rights for both communities?
Because people now are living in the houses of Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriot, and people of Turkish Cypriot are living in the houses of Greek
Yes,
Cypriot.
and many years passed. So how are we going to respect property rights?
Are we kicking them out?
Are we going to reinstate? Are we going to compensate? Are we going to exchange, or a combination of these remedies? Who will pay for this? In what time? How will people be confident that they will be getting payment? What amount? What levels? Those kind of things. And so on and so forth. Regarding EU, there were many details. We were lucky to have Andreas, who had a lot of expertise on how EU functioned. EU has lots of bodies.
Because you had also the presidency as well, it helped of the EU. He was responsible for the presidency of Cyprus in EU.
Yes, but not only these few years, my whole life I worked for this. I was one of the people since the 80s working for the accession of Cyprus to the EU. Then after the accession, I was permanent representative to the EU for 3 years, and then deputy minister, and I had to organize and be responsible for running the first Cyprus presidency. And beyond the technical things, I was trying to instill, if you like, the notion of the political significance of operating within the EU, how a federal system can work within the EU framework. And I had the chance to have Oždil, who was having the same way of thinking.
So how do you think we should do? I think we should get these 6 chapters, start from the government's one, and start describing how it was going to be. If you agree with this overview, I think there's a better.
Of course, I don't mind, but it's I'm not so sure whether in a podcast like this we can really go into lots of details. But to give you an idea on
in a podcast like this, you can go in a.
Well, I mean, you really need documents, slideshows to people really to understand and digest. So we can just maybe try to give an overview. If we had managed in Crown Montana to sign, what kind of United Federal Cyprus would
you are saying
come into being?
not everyone knows, maybe from the international viewers. We're talking about 2017. It was the conversation that it came very close to a solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it was an amalgamation of all these years of work. So if we were able to sign a deal,
and it's very important. If we start again, we shouldn't, and I don't think we will go back to other conversations to scratch everything that was being done in the previous year. So we're going to continue from kind of the same fundamentals or not?
This is what we believe should be done. Now, whether the current, people in power are willing to do it, this is another story. But don't forget that both myself and Oζντίλ Ναμί we are former negotiators. We are not running the show right now. But for us, very clearly, we need to make whatever we can in order to uphold all those convergences, this 95% which has been agreed. Otherwise, if we start, undermining this and opening again the issues, we will never make it. Therefore, I would say, and I agree 100% with the description by Ožντίλ of the various areas, if you like, and true on most of them, we have so much progress that we were considering that the remaining divergences were really breachable. So
we're talking about the 5% now, and as you guys explained,
but
I'm going to give a brief explanation. The 5% was not agreed because it's this 5% that will have some differences. But if we sit down to the table, it's a give and take. Okay, this is important for us, you give us this is important for us, and this is how the 5% was going to be agreed.
Indeed, I would add that there are also some technicalities and things that have to do with the quality of the outcome, and not necessarily a give and take in the sense that, it's like an Oriental bazaar. There are some very fundamental things. 5% is really, the most sensitive that usually remain open. But we were really confident that, yes, it was possible. And we can, go a bit further in depth on each one of those issues, not very, very deeply, because as Ožντίλ says, this is impossible in the course of just a couple of hours. But we can describe, what has been agreed and what remains open in order to give you an idea of how much work has been put into this. But going back a little bit to the history of the negotiation, negotiations in Cyprus started already in 1968 in a different context. Then we had, people are telling us, and books are writing, that in the beginning of the 70s, they came close to an understanding under different circumstances, of course. After 74, things changed fundamentally, and there was the separation and the presence of the Turkish army. And in 77, there was the first understanding on the idea of a federation. And this was fundamental because so far, the Greek Cypriots at least...
Federation means
that you have two constituent communities in a federal system. Mm-hmm. Then this was fundamental for the Greek Cypriots. It was meaning that they would be ready to completely transform the structure of the state, to transform it into a federation. And in exchange, the expectation of the Greek Cypriots, it was the fundamental idea, if you like, we would get reunification, withdrawal of troops, and return of the displaced persons. This was in our mind at the time. Then, of course, over the years, this idea took a more concrete shape, and it evolved in what we call today into the bicommunal, bizonal federation with political equality as described in UN resolutions. And this framework is indeed defined in many United Nations Security Council resolutions. So we are not talking now in a vacuum. There is a framework which is defined by the United Nations. And we have given concrete expression to this through the negotiations, in particular through the work which was done in the framework of the Annan Plan, and even before that, somehow with the Boutros-Ghali set of ideas. Then in 2008, under Christofias and Talat, there were a lot of convergences. Oždil was involved at the time, not myself, during the first Christofias-Talat period. And then in 2013, we started a new effort, if you like, which led us to, in 2014, to the common declaration of the 11th February of 2014, which laid the ground for all the negotiations that followed, in particular between 2015 and 2017, when the leader of the Turkish Cypriot community was Mustafa Akinci, and the negotiator was Oždil Nami. During this period, which was somehow the golden era of the effort, we built on what the work that was done before. So we never thought that we would start again. And this is what allowed us to move so fast and come so close, because we were ready and willing to respect the previous convergences. Of course, on some issues we had some, we wanted to see, maybe these can be done better this way, etc. But there was a fundamental understanding. If you don't manage to agree on a change, you keep what you already had. So, and the fact that we managed to go to Geneva in January 2017 and to Crans-Montana in June, July 2017, by itself is an expression of the progress, because there was somehow an understanding that we will be able to talk about territory and security and guarantees only if we have sufficient progress in the other matters. And since in November 2016, we managed to go to Montbéliarn to discuss territory, this was a signal that guys were approaching the end. And then January 2017, we started discussing security and guarantees. So we had the whole package. And this by itself is significant of what I was saying, that we were close.
I agree. So I want to mention two things. Looking at the future, I also think that you cannot start from scratch. But I had started my negotiator position with Mr. George Jacobo, who was the negotiator of late Christofias. And we created all these convergence papers. Then there was the period of Anastasiadis Eroğlu, where nothing really happened, and it sort of collapsed almost everything. Then Akıncı got elected, and we resumed negotiations. And both sides wanted to change things from the period of Talat and Christofias. And like Andreas said, we didn't say, no, nothing can change. We both agreed that we can make an attempt. If these are not God-given like a Bible or something. These are man-made agreements. If somebody has a better idea, we should be open for it. But before starting to negotiate, we agreed on a principle that we are going to engage in a new exercise for only a limited time. If I'm not mistaken, we allowed ourselves 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something. We will go over all the Talat Hristofias convergences. If somebody has a suggestion for a change, it can be put on the table. There can be a brief discussion. If we agree, we change it. If not, the previous agreement stands. Okay? So this was the methodology which worked very well.
A lot of things changed.
No, not but some things were improved. We were both happy with the changes because, you know, Cyprus experienced a lot of things under EU membership. Some mentalities changed. We lived through some things. There were changes in the north as well.
But yes, I mean, I mentioned it earlier. There was an allusion to this. You know, on the EU matters, we have changed quite a few things because, you know, I don't want to boast about my experience, but, you know, I had some ideas and I was very happy to have Oζντίλ Ναμί as my interlocutor. He would understand exactly the reasons behind my...
You referred previously is that
yes,
you
exactly,
changed
yes.
some things in EU matters.
Yes, exactly. In particular in those things.
Without upsetting the balance, but in order to ensure more functionality. This was the idea. How can this new state of affairs operate within the European Union framework? This is an example of how we could improve things.
Yeah, indeed. So in the end, you asked another question. How would it look like?
Yes.
So
that's the meat of the conversation.
If we had an agreement, there were going to be some fundamental changes. First, there was going to be a territorial adjustment.
So you want to go by the territorial? You want to go by the governments? How do you?
I'll try to take it from the simple to the more complex.
Okay.
Territorial adjustment was simple. There was a map. Turkish current border would be drawn towards north. So there was going to be a handover of territory to the Greek Cypriot side. And there was going to, this was not going to be done.
Remove the border completely.
Yes, the border, there was not going to be any wired lines anymore, no mines, no nothing, okay? But just like within Europe, on the map, there was going to be this imaginary line, but on the ground, you wouldn't see. Maybe you would see some signs, like in Belgium, you see signs changing from Flemish to Dutch, but French. It would be something like that, but you wouldn't have gates or whatever.
Or controls.
Or controls or nothing. So this was going to be one big change. The second one, you would see withdrawal of troops. Start. So there was going to be a calendar, and this was going to be reviewed by an agreed
with call for all the troops to be removed.
No, that was don't rush. Okay, but you would see some start.
One of the remaining.
Some start. Okay, okay. Then coming to property, immediately there was going to be a property commission established, so people would be able to take their property claims to this commission. It would act like almost like a court. People would produce their documentation, make their property claims, and this court would look, okay, who has this property now for both sides.
So,
okay?
Example, my father, for example, has property, some fields and stuff in the north. So, what was going to happen?
So, let's make a hypothetical case. You would say that this land belonged to my grandfather, and I am emotionally attached to it. I want it back. And the court will say, okay, we note down your request. Let's see what the current situation is. Is there a user? What has happened? Maybe they will look and they will see a big apartment block on the farm of your grandfather. They will tell you, sorry, that farm that you were dreaming of and you were seeing the picture no longer exists. There is an apartment and there are many buildings around. So the life has changed dramatically. Therefore, we will compensate you for the
And
land.
who judge and how much?
This commission would
and from
judge.
who money? Who puts the money?
Okay, one by one. First, the decision. Okay, so the court will look at the case based on its merits of the claimant and the current user. So we would call it dispossessed owner. In this case, you would be the dispossessed owner, and the current user would be the people living in the apartment building. And the court would decide. The main objective was, let's respect the property rights, but without causing a lot of disturbance to the daily lives of people. But let's say your land was empty.
Before we go to my land, so is the other person that is living in my apartment that they built the apartment complex going to give something back?
No. According to the system that we have, these properties have been allocated to people based on a system. Either they gave up their title deed of their property in the south, or the state created a law saying that this is your property, take it. So it's the responsibility of the state. Okay? So the current user would not have to pay.
So now in the north, the state gave titles to all the lands.
Well, most of the land has been distributed now to new owners. Okay, so when the time comes to settle the property issue, of course, we would have to find money. Okay, because we distributed more than we had. So how are we going to find the money? Then we work.
So nobody of us is getting affected, and nobody of you guys is getting affected economically. We need to
economically.
Let
us still finish first.
Okay. Yeah. So everybody.
I'm trying to understand. This would be the conversation how it looks like. A bit of a mess.
Out of this property arrangement, nobody would lose money. So Greek Cypriots who left property in the north, their property rights, which are not respected right now, only minimally, would be respected. But this doesn't mean property would be reinstated in every case. We had 3 remedies: reinstatement, compensation, exchange. So either the property would be given back if there is no user, it is empty, it didn't really change much, it is possible to give it back, then it would be given back.
But where is the line? For example, if someone is having a farm there, it's okay to get it back?
Okay, so there were detailed criteria to be given to the commission so that the commission would be able to make objective decisions to the extent that we could. Okay, so there would be straightforward cases. It was an empty land. Now it has a building on it. We called it significant improvement. So if it is significant improvement, you cannot give it back. You would give the value of the land. And there was a formula to establish what is the value of the land. Okay, so it would not be up to the judge.
What's the formula to establish the value of the land?
It's a bit complicated to explain right now, but it would not be up to the judge just to say, this is enough for you, take it and go. No, there would be a formula based on which these values would be
it would be also some emotional damage, I don't know, given
so
I don't know, I'm just asking.
Okay, so let's say and this was one of the remaining disagreements we had. There is a house, and there is someone living in it, okay? And the house will be within the area to be given back to the Greek Cypriot side. But there's a Turkish Cypriot family there. Normally, you would say, okay, because the area will be returned to the Greek Cypriot side, if there was a Greek Cypriot owner who wants his house back, it should be given back. However, we said, as the Turkish side, listen, we have, and they also raised this issue, there is this concept of emotional attachment, okay? and this could be happening in a house in Kyrenia also. If there is such a case where either the dispossessed owner or the current user can claim an emotional attachment, okay, which can override the claim of the current user, that should be taken into account. So we even went into details like this. So, for example, in an area, to be given back to the Greek Cypriot side, if in that old house, since 74, a Turkish family is living, and they say, we are happy to live under Greek Cypriot administration, please don't kick us out. We have been living in this house for 60 years. We have planted all these trees. Our children and grandchildren all grew up. And the person who now claims never lived it because the original owner died and he left the house to his grandchild who has never even seen the house. So let's take the emotional connection and the same could happen for a house in Kyrenia. Okay, someone may claim emotional attachment, saying that the current user can be easily located somewhere else. Please take this into consideration.
So you said one thing, just to clarify. So you said some places they will be given.
Yes.
But
yes.
I thought that the whole, it will not be borders.
No borders. But we are talking about a bicommunal, bizonal federation. This concept means that there will be two areas. One area that will be administered by the Turkish Cypriot community, majority, and the other area administered by the Greek Cypriot community.
So now we'll come to the government.
No, not only, because now the area under the control of the Turkish Cypriots is 37%. The understanding was that in the framework of the settlement, this area will come down to somewhere around 29%. In Greek Cypriots, we proposed 28.2, and Mr. Akinci proposed 29.2. So it will be somewhere there, if you like, which means that there will be 8% of the territory that will be returned under Greek Cypriot administration. And it's not just, any area. It would be areas that have a very important significance in terms of population, because let's say Famagusta, if you return 2% of the territory, you have 35,000 displaced persons that will be able to return.
Okay, so it's strategically.
Yes. This is a discussion we were having. Therefore, the overall idea is that most of the dispossessed and the displaced persons will be able to return under Greek Cypriot administration. So this is one element. We didn't finalize. There were remaining questions there. But we made also, and this was based on decisions of the European Court of Human Rights, we made a distinction between property rights and right to return. Those are two different things. We agreed that, and this was a very important thing, that there is respect for property rights. So nobody is losing his rights. But, as Ozdil mentioned, what kind of remedy you are going to provide, whether it's reinstatement, you go back to the property, whether it's alternative property exchange, whatever, this remains to be discussed in the framework of the Property Commission. But very, very important, there was also an understanding for the right of return to your home. If you had a home and the home is still there, as Ozdil was saying, there is cases of significant improvement, changes. And if the home is still there and you have a really emotional attachment, which means that you lived in the house and your kids lived in the house and they were of age to have memories, you get priority and you return to your home. If you don't have this emotional attachment, it's just property. And property is a different thing because property can receive other remedies. You can receive, compensation, can receive exchange, can receive other remedies. But we were paying particular attention to the emotional link of the people to their properties. So, and very, very important, because you asked the question earlier. Just one thing was still, and I finish.
No, guys, we talk
beyond this idea of significant improvement, which you understand it's very important. So Still was saying, you had a farm, and now on the farm there is a development, big hotel. What are you going to do? Are you going to destroy the hotel in order to give back the property? You cannot. So this significant improvement is a very important dimension. And on this, we were almost there. Both sides accepted the notion, etc. And we were ready and willing to accommodate the respective difficulties. And this is where the Secretary General in Crans-Montana came in with this idea to give more importance to the current users in the areas that will remain under the Turkish Cypriot administration, and more importance to the dispossessed owner in the areas that will go under Greek Cypriot administration. But in any case, there was something for me fundamental, if you like. We had this property commission that will have to decide on the claims of the dispossessed owners first. And this is a fundamental difference between the Annan Plan and what was on the table in 2017. In the Annan Plan,
was
2004.
2004 that agreed and came to referendum.
No, not agreed. Came to referendum. Because there was something different. There was arbitration, so it was not a real agreement. There were a lot of things agreed, but eventually the agreement would come through the referendum. But on property, the idea was that the agreement itself was casting what would happen with property somehow in stone. You didn't have the right to say much. 2017, we agreed that you have a property commission, you file your claim, there is a decision. If you are happy, fair enough. If you are not happy, you go to the property court, you have an appeal, and there again, there is a decision. If you are happy, very well. If you are not happy, it is considered that you have exhausted the domestic remedies and you go to the European Court of Human Rights. So eventually the system we established was fully in compliance with European standards. And this is a fundamental difference with what was happening in the Annan Plan, where you didn't have any say and any recourse.
And I remember that in 2004 you were against the Annan Plan.
Myself, yes.
And this was one of
the reasons, but there were others, in particular for me, related to security and guarantees, and more than that, the very tight link that was established in the Annan Plan between the implementation of the agreement and the accession of Turkey to the European Union. And on this one, history proved that I was right. We are now 21 years later, and there is no accession of Turkey to the European Union. Imagine if we were to link the implementation of the agreement to the accession of Turkey. So this is another story, you know.
Interesting. You mentioned about some Greek territories that were going to get under the governments of the Greek Cypriot community.
Yes, some percentage of the territory.
Give us some example. What was the areas that were Famagusta, but like what others?
Famagusta, a lot of areas in Morphou, Eritrea, many, the villages of Messauria.
It's kind of moving a bit closer to the border, is not getting other things from the inside in the corner.
But there will be a new line. You know, the percentage.
It's kind of moving the new line
there will understand. Be a line.
By the way, I'm like, sometimes I'm afraid to say border or this stuff because people are very confused this and they are
you know what you do? You say without prejudice. Without prejudice means that you use whatever terminology you want. It does not mean that what I'm using is the formal or has any. So
excuse me, people.
But yes, there are various categories of properties. As Oždíl was saying, there are most of the properties in the north were allocated. Not all of them, however. There is property which was not allocated. Of course, this, in particular, what is today military zones, this is different because there is no current user. It's easier to return it to their dispossessed owners. There are also, and on this one we have an agreement, there are the religious sites, the churches, etc. And for this, for the area of the building of the church, again, this will be returned. So there are various categories, if you like, of properties.
But just to imagine, it's kind of moving the line a bit.
But the line will move. This is a territorial.
8%
yes,
of
it's
the line
important.
will be
yes.
a bit.
And this 8% is not the slopes of Pentadactylos. It's areas that were deeply inhabited. So this will make a significant difference because the most important thing is how many properties you have to remedy through alternative means, and this affects also fundamentally the cost. Imagine how many billion are necessary in order to compensate all those dispossessed owners that will not be able to recover their properties. And then the same applies for the properties of the Turkish Cypriots in the south. It's both directions.
So now we come to the money. Where do we find the money, Oždíl, to pay for all this stuff?
Money, Oždíl.
No. I mean, like Andreas said, there was going to be a territorial adjustment. Of course, he is saying 8%. We were saying less, but our difference was 1%. But it was true that we were trying to pay attention to make this line to the best that we can, so that the number of people who can return under Greek Cypriot administration could be maximized. So after the territorial adjustment, of course, the property issue, and as I said, exchange, compensation, reinstatement. But no matter how you slice the cake, there would be some amount of money needed. So the idea was for Turkish Cypriots, currently, almost all Turkish Cypriots gave up their title deed to the state. So we would establish a body who would be using all these title deeds and either to use it to pay for the compensation, or maybe develop those properties, earn money and pay. So there was going to be some amount of money from the properties left, Turkish properties left.
I'm confused. How explain again how this happens.
The title deeds are now belonging.
Okay, in the south,
yes.
The title deeds of all Turkish Cypriots not all of them, but 75%, I think, which is important. Were given to the administration. They don't belong anymore to the Turkish Cypriots, and in exchange they got properties in the north.
Yes. Okay. So.
On this side, on our side, so the titles have been given. Okay, interesting. Yeah,
okay. So these are Turkish properties in the south, but the title deeds are now in the hands of the state. So the state would use these title deeds, turn them into money, and use that money to pay the compensation. In our estimate,
how do they turn them into money?
Either sell or engage in property development or something.
Sell how? So
these are Turkish properties.
But now people are living maybe.
Okay, so the property commission would look whether those can be sold. If not, if there is a current user, Greek Cypriots, those title deeds could be used to exchange property. Okay. So it would lower the cost. These title deeds would lower the cost of the property settlement.
Yes, there is something important here. On the Greek Cypriot side, the title deeds were not touched upon. So you have users that use the property under the control of the commission we have for Turkish Cypriot properties. Let's say Larnaca. Okay, Larnaca, there was a whole area that belonged to Turkish Cypriots. This area is now under the control of the Greek Cypriots and of the government, but we have not given title deeds. You have users. The property belongs probably to the Turkish Cypriot authorities now. So this is what we're talking about. You know, if you might have in Mackenzie a property that belongs to now the Turkish Cypriot authorities. So they will tell the user, you know, you want to buy, give us money and you buy it. Because he's a user, he is not owner. So they will make money.
Yeah. So, or if you want to keep it, then you have to give us your title deed if you have in the north.
Yes.
So all this would lower our estimate was
raise funding to be able to.
So our estimate was by using the property left in the south, Turkish side would be able to finance about one third of the.
Really, that much?
Yes,
one third.
Another 1/3 would be dealt by territorial adjustment. Okay. And another 1/3 would remain open, and for that we would have to raise funds either through taxation.
How many billions we're talking about?
It's billions. I shouldn't give a clear number now because property prices exchange, but it's in the billions. So one way or another,
don't say 5, 10 is under 10 billion.
No, it's more than 10.
More 20.
I mean,
the total was more, but the remaining gap,
it's another story.
The remaining gap would be around I don't know. A few billion euros, let's say.
So and under 10,
the remaining gap.
You mean the 1/3? You mean
the 1/3 after territorial adjustment and after using.
And now we're talking only about the north kind of property exchange. It will be couple of 10, 20, 30.
We are talking about the totality of the property settlement. Okay,
of the entire.
The entire. Okay, so so
it's approximately 20 to 50 billion altogether.
You cannot say. You need to.
You need to. But yeah, if the totality is around 20 billion, about 1/3 would be financed by the property left on the other side. By 1/3 would be dealt by the territorial adjustment. Another 1/3 would remain. Of course, this was by the property valuations.
But who did the numbers? So these are correct?
Experts. We had at that time experts working on this.
So we can trust this.
Of course, all these numbers need to be updated now. That's why I'm hesitant to give numbers. Property prices have changed. Many areas which were not developed in 2017 are now highly developed in the north. So a lot of things changed, but I don't think the ratio has changed a lot. So around 1/3 of it, Turkish side would have to find money either by international donors or by raising taxation and find the money, pay, and then Turkish side would have to pay this in a longer duration, in 10 years, 20 years, whatever, to the institution that gave the financing. So I think it is safe to say that property issue, which was thought to be one of the most difficult and unsolvable issues, we managed to solve it in a rational and way which was also implementable in a reasonable time frame. So nobody would be left without his property claim being addressed. That leaves us, so we talked about territory, we talked about security a little bit, we talked about...
we didn't talk about security at all.
Okay, so I said troops would start leaving and stuff like that. But there are issues that were left. Regarding governance and power sharing,
so we finished kind of the territory conversation.
I mean, this is the idea.
We got the
idea.
Okay, so there was going to be a territorial adjustment. Land would be given to South. Regarding property, there was going to be an independent property commission taking the claims and giving either money or the property back or exchange. So this is the main idea. And we talked a little bit about financing. Then, regarding governance and power sharing, we were going to continue for the Greek Cypriot side with the presidential model. So the United Cyprus would have a president and a vice president.
Like the United States.
Like the United States.
Like Vance and Trump.
Okay, right now. So, so the executive would be a presidential system. Then the legislature...
So it was kind of forced for the Turkish Cypriot community to have the vice president or the president? How
No, it was going to be in a rotating manner.
How many years?
Well, I mean, the rotation would likely be like for a 6-year period, 4-year Greek Cypriot, 2-year Turkish Cypriot, because of the population.
And there was going to switch the vice president to become president?
Yes, yes. And by the way, I should also note that in these agreements, we never said for any of the agreements, except for the senators, that this one will be a Greek Cypriot, this one will be a Turkish Cypriot. We always talked about from the more populous community, from the less populous community. So the rotation would be based on the population ratio. So we didn't say forever the president will be Greek Cypriot 4 years and forever Turkish Cypriot 2 years. No, it would be based on...
So you don't think this will be a problem? This will develop some problem? Because I think the Greek Cypriot community, to have a president Turkish Cypriot for 2 years might have like a problem. So I'm just saying about the solution for people to vote. So you don't think this will be a problem, Mavrogiannis?
No, I think there is no perfect solution. But this is a way, if you like, in a federal system to respect fundamentally, the rights and the ambition of both communities. Because, in a federation, you go beyond the idea that, majority rules. Because it's a different setup.
Because the minority would always be fucked.
If you have this is a problem that you face in many situations like ours. But in Cyprus, we shouldn't forget that already the 1960 constitution was not based on a centralized state with just majority rules. There was by communal composition. So we are not inventing something completely new. It's, if you like, a way to accommodate the consensus of both communities, but fundamentally, and this is, I think, good for all of us to bear in mind, in the new setup where you are going to have 2 areas, one administered by one community, the other administered by the other community, which means that you have, like in other federal systems, you have local governments or regional governments or whatever, federated governments. And then you are going to have the federal level where, as Oždíl was saying, you are going to have, this rotating presidency on this ratio mentioned by Oždíl. We are going to have a council of ministers. We have agreed that there will be 7 Greek Cypriots and 4 Turkish Cypriot ministers. And
doesn't mean they take this minister thing. You can allocate the minister in you can become agriculture.
Yes. We don't decide in advance which ministries go to which constituency.
Even on that, there were some details. That's why I said it's very difficult to explain everything in a podcast. But even on that,
we're doing a good job, Oždíl.
Although that of course the president and vice president could allocate, but we said at least either the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Treasurer would go to the other community. So there were some combinations that we paid attention to. Even to those details, we had agreed on those things.
Okay, what was being agreed about the ministers?
But this connection you cannot have at the same time the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for instance. So there were combinations
so we both
in order to
contribute
guarantee
to the foreign policy.
But if I can finish on what I was saying before, this system, of course, we are going to talk a little bit also about, beyond the executive, you have the legislative power. And then you have the judicial power. And the legislative, we have agreed that the Senate, because it represents the communal character of the state, you have 50-50, the number of senators. On the chamber, the parliament, if you like, the deputies, there it's different because there will be 75% representatives of the more populist community, currently the Greek Cypriot community, and 25% of the Turkish Cypriot community. In order to approve legislation, you need both. It has to be approved at the House, has to be approved by the Senate. So
what explain maybe, because this is kind of I know Senate in the United States, but what Senate really means?
It's another legislative chamber. You have two bodies. You have the Senate and you have the chamber. Both of them have similar powers with some exceptions, but on the legislation part have exactly the same powers. For a legislation to be adopted, it needs to be approved by both bodies.
It's like in Europe we have the Council and the European Parliament.
Okay, but there is co-decision. But the Council is not representatives. It's the states there. But this is very important. So for the legislature, we had full agreement. No problem. And then you had the judiciary. Again, you will have a Supreme Court with equal numbers in order to guarantee, if you like, that both constituent states are there. But what I wanted...
Equal numbers?
For the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. What are the things that had equal numbers? It was the Senate and Supreme Court?
Yes. But there are other things where it's fundamental.
There are independent bodies. You had.
Yes, but it is important to know that the citizen on his daily life will have to deal more and mainly with the government of his entity, of his federated states, and not with the federal level. So for the citizen, the federal level will be something that it will be completely out of his daily life, because we agreed to have some fundamental freedoms. So freedom of movement throughout the island, no problem there whatsoever. Freedom of settlement, there are some small, not very significant safeguards, if you like, that are required by the Turkish Cypriot community mainly. And the freedom to acquire property throughout the island, there again, with some safeguards that are asked by the Turkish Cypriot community in order to be in a situation where they have control over their area. Those three fundamental freedoms. And then also the four freedoms of the European Union. Free movement of goods, free movement of persons, free movement of capital, free movement of services. This will be implemented. So we are talking about a completely new structure. So, and this offers the best guarantees. I have to add also something.
Why it offers the best?
You know, because it will be, you have the guarantees of the European Union.
Okay.
So and then something which was very significant was that we agreed on this rotation in the presidency and the vice presidency on the ratio we mentioned. But part of this agreement is also that there will be cross-voting and weighted voting. So which means that one community participates to some percentage in the election in the other community. So which by itself, you understand, allows a lot of stabilization of the system. So it's not that like in 1960, the Greek Cypriots elect the president and the Turkish Cypriots elect the vice president, full stop. And in the 1960, you know that the vice president was not replacing the president in case of absence. It was the Speaker of the Parliament. In this system, you are going to have these highest officials working together. So, and those things are very important because this is how you create the real interaction and you have the communities working for the common interest.
Yes. I mean, we pay a lot of attention to not only to build stability, but also interdependence, because we believe that the main security comes from building interdependence. And another basic principle, which means that we will need each other.
You need each other all the time.
You need each other all the time. So another principle was, political equality.
In what ways we need each other?
No decision at the several level will be made without having all of them, all the people, the Council of Ministers, President and Vice President, they will have to work together.
Yeah.
But this is the most important thing. Having this interdependence, very strong interdependence at the several level, and as I was saying earlier, at the same time, at the level of the relationship of the citizen with the authorities, this will be settled most of the time at the constituent level, which will mean that the citizen will feel free.
Yeah. And this is
constraints.
Basically the EU idea, the European idea. After the World Wars, what was the main instrument of peace? Building interdependence. Started with coal and steel agreement, and then creating other institutions so that they can function together. And if one collapses, the other collapses. But if one benefits, everyone gets to benefit. So we wanted to create a microcosm of that idea here, based on political equality and based on effective participation. Because if one side does not feel equal, then becomes resentful and works against the system.
Well, yes, it makes total sense, but this can be sometimes used against if it's interdependent and one community decides to veto kind of the other in some important fact that they are important to them. Maybe they are going to bring more conflict. I don't know. This is
you are right to think about this, but we thought about this as well. So we have in the system what we call deadlock resolving mechanism. And we are not talking necessarily as the definition of political equality of equal numerical participation. But equality means that you are not sidelined at all. And don't forget something which is also fundamental, and Ozdiln mentioned it, the European way of doing things, which would entail, in the case of Cyprus, first and foremost, 85% of our legislation is European legislation. So this will not be within the purview of our elected representatives to question it. So most of the things will be solved at the level of Brussels, Strasbourg. So then, also very important, with the European Union, many powers are transferred to the Commission, to the Council, at the EU level. So we have this supranational dimension. Then we have the exact opposite for some of the remaining powers. From the level of the state where they are currently, they go based on proportionality and subsidiarity, they go very close to the citizens. So they are not exercised anymore at the national level where conflicts will appear. So through these dynamics, one going towards European integration and the other through proportionality and subsidiarity, you sort out most of the problems. Then for the remaining issues, as I was saying, you have this deadlock resolving mechanism, and you have, at the end of the day, the need to have cooperation to sort out the problems. Will be problems? Of course. In all states there are problems, even the best of the best. But the most important is to create a solid system where the problems will not end up by spoiling and destroying the structures. To the contrary, as Ozdiln was saying, one will balance the other, and eventually things are going to work. So, and this is the main concern today of the Greek Cypriots, is functionality. And I believe we have addressed it. I believe that with what we have agreed, the system will be sufficiently functional in order to allow us to move forward, to leave these difficulties we were facing in the past.
But let us still speak a bit more, because you got so far 70% of the speaking time, like the population. Close.
Have you checked it?
No,
I don't think you are right. But but even between myself and Ozdiln, I'm very happy to give him 80% and keep 20. So you know that we had occasions where we were reporting for each other. So
it's totally fine. He got a training as a lawyer, but I got a training as a manager. So
the time of speaking is by nature a bit more.
Exactly, because in one of the basic things in management they teach you is to delegate. So but what's the story here? The thing is, like everything else, establishing a country, a state, an administration is very much like establishing your own life, the way you treat your children and everything. You do your best, okay? You try to give your child the best education, the best environment and everything, hoping that his life will also turn out to be good. But if he doesn't make good of that opportunity, he mixes with bad friends, he gets hooked to bad habits, then you can't help him and he destroys his life. What we tried to do for the future generations was to create the environment conducive for their future prosperity development. But if they go down the track of fanatics, hardliners, extremists, and destroy everything, then that will be their fate. There is no guarantee to anything. It's up to the future generations to make use of what we try to create. We try to create something that minimizes the risks. But You know, in the world that we live in, these extremists take one issue and put it under the microscope and overblow its importance, and you forget all the other benefits that the system that you're currently living offers. So what we did was, in order to minimize the friction between the two communities and decrease the resentment, resentment will be there. You mentioned that it would be difficult for an average Greek Cypriot to accept, to see a Turkish Cypriot as a president. It would be a hard compromise. And for a Turkish Cypriot, it's a hard compromise to give up territory, to open property files again, to see the Turkish security umbrella being removed. Everyone will have, but you have to have a balance sheet. Pluses on the one side, minuses on the other side, and make your decision. There will be minuses, painful things to digest, but there will be pluses. And for our future, we have to take all of them into consideration. And as a package, do we like it or not a single issue. Now, in order to minimize all these problems, what we did was we agreed that the federal government should have a list of competences. And really, we tried to keep it to a minimum in order to allow people to continue with their current daily lives, taking their own constituent state as a counterpart and not having to deal with the federal government, where you would have the two communities, equal representation and effective participation. But in many issues, in your daily lives, you would be taken your own constituent state. And for many issues, life would continue normally, especially for the Greek Cypriot side. And many issues would also be delegated to Brussels anyway. And for those, the federal government would be, to a large extent, in charge. The second point I wanted to make was this. I am trying to read my own writing. This pane of concessions I have mentioned, effective participation and list of competences. These are very important issues for the future non-friction operation of the federal government. Then the federal government would be controlled by whom? By the legislative body, the House of Representatives and the Senate, plus an independent judiciary body. Okay? And also, we have not talked about it, we would have independent organizations, which would be independent from the government, everything, and which would also act like a quasi-judicial bodies to regulate competition, for example. So we would have, I don't think there is any other country around the world which was established after going through such an intense and extensive attempt to build everything so that citizens would be able to continue their life as normally as they can. I mean, I'm just thinking of all the countries. They got established with much less
and
preparatory work.
As they go.
Yes, exactly. So it was for all practical purpose, it was there in great detail. Public administration. How will people be recruited to be a civil servant? What kind of a mechanism? Who would decide? How are we going to respect the balances? All these things were taken up very seriously by the contribution of lots of experts. And we had a very serious body of work, which was already there. So we were not afraid to take this final step and create a new Cyprus based on such a model. And with the assistance of our presence in the European Union would facilitate a lot of these things.
If we're talking about governments, population is important. So what was going to happen with the people that came after the 1974? So
we would not go all Trump on them. And no. We agreed that the citizens of each side would be the citizens of United Cyprus. We exchanged numbers in order to create this agreement. And when
what are the numbers there?
In those days, in that time, the numbers were such that the historic ratio was not distorted too much. So it was okay for the Greek Cypriot
How
side.
Percent.
It was 220,000 Turkish Cypriots and 800,000 Greek Cypriots. It was 78% Greek Cypriots, around that. Without affecting, the natural growth. It's another story to talk about those that came from outside. But if the birth rate of Turkish Cypriots is higher, you are not going to tell them stop making kids.
So this was the beginning point.
What do we do with the other people? So they stay here.
It's the responsibility of each constituent state. If Mustafa Akinci said, my population is 220,000, it's up to him to keep it
that way. Okay, so we gave these numbers.
But this includes the people that came after.
We didn't want to know. We didn't want to know.
Okay.
Because you are, Phidias, how?
No, I'm just saying that I heard some rumors that maybe there is 700,000.
They are not citizens. Those numbers are not citizens.
They are not citizens first. And second, how are you going to make a distinction between somebody who came in 74, he has children, he has grandchildren, he has whatever, married to a Turkish Cypriot. So we don't want to enter into this. What is important for us is not to change
so they are not going to have a voting right.
The demographic character of the citizens.
Voting rights are attained by citizenship. We are only talking about citizens right now. Many foreigners attained Cypriot citizenship and they are now living in Limassol or Paphos. We would not tell them you are not an original Cypriot, therefore we decided to unite and your citizenship is abolished. No, each side gave under different procedures citizenship. We agreed to respect those without questioning the ancestry, heritage, whatever.
So what if you, I don't know, I'm just curious to understand this. What if the Turkish Cypriot community decides to give the rights of, for voting?
No. This is for day one. After the federation is established, the power to grant citizenship would belong to the federal government, not to constituent states.
So 220,000 approximately.
Yes, but we're talking about 2016.
16. Yeah. Now we don't know what the numbers. Okay.
So, but I mean, at the time, the ratio was respected.
And then we are going to control altogether who gets the citizenship.
Exactly, the federal government.
So there will not, you cannot like grow immediately.
No. The federal government would decide regarding those who will be naturalized. But the natural birth rate for either community, neither federal government nor constituent states.
We're going to try. Do we know which birth rate is more out of the two communities?
Ours is very low.
Ours is very low. 1.3, I think.
Yes, we are lower than the reproduction rate. Yeah. That is necessary to keep the population.
Both of the communities make kids.
Anyway, so and regarding the other section of your question, which is also important, then there are those who are living on both sides who are not citizens, but they are living here. What will happen? Those are here either because they are here to study at universities as students. We have lots of them, much more than you do. Or they came as workers. They are issued work permit. Again, the work permit, issuing the work permit would be a federal government thing. So depending on the needs of the economy. So the constituent state will say, what are the criteria? I need this many people. I can't find it locally. Therefore, we are going to issue a work permit. So there was going to be this mechanism that allows economic growth. We may have foreigners living here, but attaining citizenship, voting rights would be a federal competence.
And we managed also something very important, which was at the end of Grand Montana in place, to say that, Cyprus isn't continued to be a member state of the European Union. This means that all European citizens will have freedom to come and settle in Cyprus, including, of course, people from Greece, based on the acquis communautaire, the freedom of movement of the European Union. But what if you have this happening and Turkish citizens do not have, because Turkey is not in the European Union. And there we discussed it at length, and eventually we agreed on a proposal by the Secretary General which regulates the presence for long-term contracts in Cyprus of Turkish citizens after the settlement, in order to keep the proportions of the population and without at the same time, if you like, restricting completely and not have any equivalence between Turkish citizens and Greek citizens in Cyprus. So it was complicated, but eventually I think we have
emerged.
Yes.
A formula emerged there also. So, as I said,
I have a question about the government still. I want an example of how a regulation was going to come out of this government. So I want to ban the police. There is no police, for example, in Cyprus. What in this system that you guys negotiated and created, how the decisions was going to be made, and who can interfere with presidents and Senate and Parliament and where it comes from, just to understand a regular life of a regulation.
So the police, we would have the federal police and the constituent state police. If you are the president of the federal government, you can only interfere with the federal police, not the constituent state police. So if you want to abolish the police, you would
of course, but it's a hypothetical example because it's the constitution and you cannot abolish the police.
You need to change the constitution. But let's say you want to reform another area under your competence, then you would have to prepare a piece of legislation and send it to the parliament. The lower house would debate. And if they manage to have the vote, then they would have to send it to the Senate.
No, you said there is 75%, let's say, Greek Cypriot-speaking people and Turkish Cypriot.
Okay.
So how, if they need to vote all,
At least 1/4 of the Turkish Cypriots should also
one fourth
of those. Okay, so you can't have a legislation only voted in favor by one community to be transferred.
And the 1/4 is kind of symbolic as the population. That is 1/4, kind of.
Yes, but what Ozdil says, you cannot have legislation adopted only with the votes of one community. But then what happens if...
Then they have a veto in a way.
No, this is where... Normally, if it were just like that, but this is where we have deadlock resolving mechanism, which is equal and which will end up by producing a result that might be good or less good. And then anyway, the other house, where it's 50-50, has also to approve. And there again, there is a deadlock resolving mechanism.
Which are
that, you gather a special committee with equal numbers, and there are rules how this will work.
Yeah, but you don't engage in deadlock resolving everything. If on some issues you can't have the requirement, then you don't have the legislation.
We're talking about things that are important for the functioning of the federation.
Exactly.
So this is... But the initiative is the executive, as is in all systems. And then you can have something starting at the level of parliament, provided all the conditions that exist everywhere in the world, that you cannot, create additional expenses and this kind of thing. So it's the cooperation between the executive. You have decision by the Council of Ministers, and then it goes to Parliament. This is how it works. Let's take one example. Let's say that there is an international treaty which was negotiated and accepted by Cyprus, etc. This treaty will come to the Council of Ministers. It will have to be approved. If it is approved by the Council of Ministers, will go to the Parliament for ratification. It has to pass from the House, it has to pass from the Senate. Once it's ratified by Parliament, the president of the country will give the formal instrument of ratification. So this is normal working of a system, if you like.
With checks and balances.
Yes. And then if somebody is not happy, you have the recourse to the Supreme Court, which is...
So I think I got the picture of the government. It's a bit because for the people also, and for me as well, that I don't really understand yet exactly how the Cyprus system works with all this stuff. It's a bit hard to really imagine how it will look like because something different than we have now. But I think I got the picture of this, how it will happen. So governments and territory, we talked about it, I think.
We talked also about EU matters and property.
Property is another of the fourth or sixth thing.
Yes, as I counted, governance and power sharing, property, territory, security, economy, EU.
So we talked about territory and property.
We talked about
property. Talked about. So, but EU matters we didn't.
We did. There is not much more to say.
Let's dive in a bit more on this. So
what?
So okay, what's the role of the European Union? Is the exact so. It will be like we are now in European Union, and then we need to be you said then we need to be adapting most of all the regulations like every other European country.
Yes.
And we have the European court system that we can go, and this it's kind of you think is one of the best things that we have because we are not alone to fight. We have something higher to
the best guarantee of objectivity and independence.
So Brussels takes a decision, and you need to transpose that decision to your own legislation. Okay, Brussels will not take constituent states as a counterpart. Brussels informs the federal government, and then the federal government will look: is this my competence? If it is, then what do I have to do within my bodies to make this part of my legislation and to implement it? If it is a competence of the constituent states, then it will be the obligation of the constituent states to transpose that EU legislation into their own legislation. And the federal government will have the mechanisms to make sure that they are doing their work so that EU does not penalize the federal government. So we had all those things figured out and how those interactions would take place.
Because if you don't implement, then the federal government will have to pay a fine, let's say. If the federal government has to pay a fine to the European Union because a federated state, a constituent state, did not do their job, the federal government will have the mechanism to recover the money from the constituent state.
Yes.
So it will work. Not to mention that, when we're talking about the European Union, the regulations, and very well, are mandatory. And they are implemented throughout the European Union, whatever happens. The directives of the European Union normally have to be transposed. They have to go through Parliament and adopted in order to adjust the means that are necessary for the country to implement the directives. However, the directives have an expiry day for the national authorities to adopt them. If you don't adopt them by that deadline, they become like regulations. They become mandatory, so you cannot escape. And this is very important, very, very important. They have direct implementation and direct effect. So this creates a system where the cooperation and where, if you like, the compliance is guaranteed. Not to mention, you mentioned it earlier, the European court system and all those things that are related to the Council, to the Commission, everything.
These should not scare you, all these complications, because when Cyprus became a member of the European Union, I don't think the average man on the street was aware of all these complicated workings of the European Union, directives, legislation, transposition. Okay, only a handful of. But you had this idea that this will be good for us. Okay, and you trusted the experts.
And overall it was.
Okay, right, and this was a good idea. So I think this is how the reunification of Cyprus, if it will ever happen, will have to happen. You know, you will have to have this basic instinct that this is good for us, and we have to do this. All right, because the more details you go in, but what if this and what if that, then you become paralyzed. You have to take this decision that, all right, we will be united. Okay, it's not going to be one community state anymore. We will have to share power, but in exchange, our country will be reunited, more safe, more prosperity for all of us.
What about the Turkish Cypriot community? Do you think it will be hard to adjust to, because we are more kind of to the EU regulation, closer to, do you think it will be harder to adjust immediately to a new?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a very important challenge. And actually, during our negotiations, we recognize this as a huge challenge for Turkish Cypriots to adopt and implement. And this was also a source of concern for the Greek Cypriot voters during the previous period. We have seen this because they were saying, but we have adopted all these EU and we have increased our standards, and Turkish Cypriots are not there yet. This is going to be costly. This is also going to cause a lot of delays and problems within the functioning of the state. Therefore, we are hesitant. So in order to overcome that, Andreas and myself, we established, with the approval of the presidents, of course, leaders, an EU ad hoc committee to prepare the future Turkish Cypriot constituent state for the adoption and implementation of the EU acquis. Okay? This was in anticipation of entirety of Cyprus to be within the European Union. And that work, unfortunately, was stopped after Crans-Montana. I believe that was a very big mistake because a lot of work can be done. And by engaging in that work, many of the prejudices against each other also is dealt with. And you start creating interdependencies and this culture of cooperation and working together. And also it decreases the painful period and facilitates a more rapid adoption and implementation. So there is a lot of benefit of putting that work up front right now in anticipation of a solution.
So yes, there will be a problem.
As I said, yes.
No, it's not a problem. It's a challenge.
I suppose
it's a challenge, and you know, for me personally, one of my major, if you like, points was that I'm against any permanent derogations. And permanent derogations would mean that you don't fully implement the acquis communautaire in all areas. Personally, I'm against this because I don't believe that this is the idea where the European Union will help Cyprus. However, we all understand that we will need transitional arrangements in order for the Turkish Cypriot community and the future Turkish Cypriot constituent state to catch up. And there, of course, we're going to do all these arrangements. And the more we do as from now, Ozdil was doing things like that unilaterally, which is good. Whatever is done in order to prepare is most welcome. Anyway, I'm not worried. I'm not afraid. This is something that will happen.
Like we did 2004.
2004, well, you know.
Ourselves.
Of course. And you know.
And because we are going to be together, the communities, one will help the other to catch up faster and stuff. So it will be. But just going back to governments, one question that I started having. So we have the two communities. What about the people, for example, the mayor of cities? So we're going. Each city will elect their
local
own
authorities. Yes.
Local authorities. Yeah. And you said about police. So we're going to have different police or one police under the.
Federal police will be federal, that is going to be joint from both, and the constituent state police will be constituent state police.
So we're going to have different police in each.
Yes. This you have everywhere in the world. Yes. Everywhere in the world. Even here in Cyprus now we have also municipal police. Okay, it's this is not a real problem.
No, I was just curious to see. Okay, so we talked a bit about the European Union. So we talked about territory, we talked about property, we talked about governments, we talked about EU matters. What else?
There are two things, security guarantees and economy. The economy, I don't know if there is much we can say. In the economy, there was very good cooperation at the level of the working group. And sorting issues one after the other,
Yeah, and the main issue under economy was first, after a solution, how do we make sure that there is economic convergence between the both sides? We don't want one side to be permanently more rich than the other one. So there were mechanisms.
Because it will be dysfunctional if we are...
yes, it creates social tension as well. So there were mechanisms to make sure the federal funds would be allocated in order to facilitate the growth up until a certain period, of course, not forever. So
it was going to be allocated a bit more to the Turkish Cypriot community to catch up to...
a lot more.
A lot more.
We agreed...
Because we are a lot richer on average.
Yes.
We agreed that from the federal budget there will be an allocation 5 times higher for the Turkish Cypriot community in terms of development, going to the Turkish Cypriot constituent state. To development issues or in the Turkish Cypriot, in all sectors, for 12 years was the idea.
Yeah. But there was a cutoff period, it was not forever.
In order to catch up, in order to ensure convergence.
Which we believe also they should catch up.
Of course,
exactly.
Of course, we are not talking about the whole
then we're going to be together. That's the interesting thing. We're not separate and trying to be win each other. We want each other to be prosperous because we have same goals.
Exactly.
So, and then the elephant in the room is security guarantees.
Wait a bit on the economy. So that was the economy to equalize
That was one of the things. Then how about if there are natural resources and we discover something and the federal government gets, how do we deal with that? What portion remains with the federal government?
Because
what portion goes to the constituent states?
Gas. We found a lot of gas in our area. So it was about that as well. How do we allocate this?
Yes. So there were formulas by the economy experts that said, okay, this much of it will remain with the federal government, but the federal government cannot keep it all. Then the certain amount will have to go to the constituent states. And
how much?
Formula.
The
I don't
around.
by memory remember all the how much and ratios and what kind of. It was not like one single percentage. It was a formula that created based on the economic development and the needs of each side, what have you.
This was meant to help for the development, if you like, and the convergence. But the fundamental principle was that natural resources are federal. So, and then the federation allocates to the constituent states, taking into account what I was mentioning earlier, the idea of ensuring convergence in the course of 12 years. So it would work as a stimulus for the economic convergence of the country.
And another issue, if we're in the economics, you have the Turkish lira. So it was going to
It was going to be euro.
Euro, of course. But it was going to be a transitional period, right? Or immediately?
A
short transitional period.
How many years do you think?
No. The euro will be used from day one. For the transition would be for the complete withdrawal of the Turkish lira. So there will not, the use of the euro will not start years after the solution. Use of the euro will start.
Yes. We would have one central bank. That was another issue under economy. For a transitional period, it would have a branch in the north as well. because we have a different banking system that uses Turkish lira for its balance sheets, income statements, inspection purposes. So there are technical issues. So you would need some transition. But after that, we would be like a normal, regular EU member state country.
Okay. And now we're going to the elephant in the room, as Mavrogiannis has called it. Securities and guarantees.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun.
Well, on security guarantees, basically, of course, it's not only about Treaty of Guarantee or Treaty of Alliance. You know, we were talking about the overall security of Cyprus. But of course, most people, what they understand is what will happen to Turkish troops and right of intervention, so on and so forth. On that, Turkish side already, all sides have said, okay, there will be rapid withdrawal of troops. We did not establish a calendar, but it was going to be rapid. The initial stages would be accelerated and then slowing down, and it would have a cutoff date. Now, at that cutoff date, whether some troops would remain under some format or not was going to be decided if we had managed to call the leaders of Turkey, Greece, and UK, which we couldn't go to that stage. But we knew two things. One, Secretary General said in Gali's set of ideas, paragraph number 6, he said that the 1960 treaty with the right of intervention is not sustainable. A new system that gives a feeling of security to both communities that involves the guarantors, I am paraphrasing a little bit, should be created. We said yes to that idea. Everyone said yes to the idea. The problem was we couldn't go into the details of it. We couldn't go into the final elaboration and give and take. We got stuck because we were not saying we were not opening our final hand on security and guarantees. So when Andreas says that Turkey didn't really accept full withdrawal of troops or abolition of the guarantees, he is right. We accepted the concept of Secretary General that something must be done to it, that something should involve abolition of the right of intervention, unilateral right of intervention, and it should also involve a rapid withdrawal of troops. Okay, so far, all right. But in order to say more, we said we need to hear more on the first 5 paragraphs and engage in a give and take. And in our last podcast, I also wanted to emphasize that part. Looking back, the problem I see is the mechanism we had in Crans-Montana was not conducive for both sides to open their final hand and engage in this final give and take. We blame the Greek Cypriot side for not accepting everything we wanted on the first 5 paragraphs. They were accusing us of not opening our hand further on right of intervention, withdrawal of troops. We got stuck, and we didn't have a mechanism that would push us to open our hand fully and finish it there. So I think looking ahead to the future, that will be the main challenge on how to make sure that problem does not arise again.
Yes, I agree 100% with Ozdil. What I want to underline is that in 2015, when negotiations with Anastasiadis and Akinci started, one of the first things we agreed was that the security of the one is not at the expense of the security of the other. And this was, as was still mentioned, in line with this idea, which was already at Bengali's set of ideas. And this is where we need to find this very delicate balance. How can we achieve security for all? And how do we have a system which respects fully the fact that Cyprus is a sovereign state, full member of the European Union, and eventually you can not have any third country having right to interfere with its internal affairs. It's complicated, it's difficult to transition to this system, but really I honestly believe this is possible and feasible.
But how do I achieve security actually?
There will be lots of elements. I mean, everything we do to have a well-functioning country within the European Union contributes to security, actually. We talked about building interdependence, a cultural cooperation, confronting the challenges of the world together, surviving in this region together, okay? So all these things are elements of our education system, how we teach our children. How do we motivate our businesses to establish partnerships? So today in Europe, after 2 world wars, you know well, it's inconceivable that they go to war. How did they manage? We take it. But of course, these things take time. In the meantime, there will be more classical methodologies engaged. And after a period, there would be a review. Now, whether what happens at that review, what not, should be discussed by politicians, by military experts, by security experts. The problem was, how do we move to that final stage and enable a very open-hearted, frank debate on this and on the remaining aspects of the Guterres framework?
And you're talking about the 5% now.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but this is the 5%. But as Ozdil was saying, the most fundamental thing when you talk about security, you need to bear in mind, as again Ozdil mentioned earlier about how the European Union started. You create the organic conditions for peace through all those sectors, through education, through pulling things together. This was the fundamental idea of the European community for steel and coal. We pull together. Here too, if you start creating those organic conditions, it means that not only between the communities in Cyprus, but between Cyprus and Turkey, between Cyprus and Greece and everybody, there will be no reasons to have wars or to have violence. You are going to have reason, competition, of course, competition in the economic field, in the cultural field, wherever, but not you replace the bullets by arguments and by competition. And it is really possible, and this is our idea. Let's create those organic conditions for peace and cooperation and prosperity in this Mediterranean.
We kind of want to remove Turkey and Greece to have the right to intervene and all these things.
Yes, this is at the end of the day, it's necessary. We cannot have having guarantors having the right.
UK as well.
Not to have interest. They have the right to be interested. Not to have the right to intervene militarily, more so. But to intervene in general in our internal affairs. But you need to create the conditions for this.
So can you give me a brief explanation of what, so the security and guarantee was one of the things that was in the 5%, like remove completely the military from the Turkish. What are other things that was in the 5%? That was
5% is the Gali set of ideas. Those 6 paragraphs. By and large, those are the things. If you read those 6 paragraphs, you get a very good idea. What are the main remaining, that's what Secretary General called, main remaining outstanding issues. So if that's settled in a spirit of give and take.
Can you describe me a bit what that is?
Yes, the paragraph number 1 was regarding governance and power sharing, this rotating presidency. And
that it was important for you.
Yes, of course. It's a rotating presidency and this one positive vote,
One positive vote means?
We will have a federal public administration. And in some areas, you would have to have at least one Turkish Cypriot public civil servant to say yes. I shouldn't say one Turkish Cypriot, one from each community to say yes in order for that decision to be adopted or implemented. You can't have government institutions only run by one community and not by the other. So this one positive vote was to ensure this effective participation
in all the organizations of the government.
So again, this is a little bit complicated. It is not as straightforward as saying one positive vote in every level and every institution. No, there were institutions with only one person. So what do you? But it was a general idea that some of its details, most of its details was figured out, but in some areas there was still some discussion that needed to take place. So that was paragraph number 1, mainly one positive vote, rotating presidency, the remaining aspects of this. Item number 2 was equivalent treatment of EU Turkish nationals.
Yes, we mentioned it.
We mentioned it. The third one was under the property chapter, this emotional attachment issue. We wanted the emotional attachment criteria to be taken into consideration for areas under territorial adjustment. So if we are going to give back the territory, but the Turkish Cypriot wants to remain there, and he claims an emotional attachment. We wanted that, and the Greek Cypriot side was saying, no, if a territory is going to be given back, the Greek Cypriots basically should have the final say. So there was that thing.
There are very few things. Territory we also need to see which parts are going to be under Greek Cypriot administration. Nothing fundamental, but so I mean bridgeable differences. But the details very often are more difficult than the principle. So
it's the spirit and it's the political will. If it is there, all the remaining issues could have been resolved in Crown Montana that day. But as the Secretary General said, we hit a block because the political will necessary was lacking. So that's what we should focus on from now on, I believe.
And now we're talking about the referendum. We want to do in both communities a referendum to accept this solution.
It's not that
is necessary.
Want. This is not necessarily what we want. There is now, for the last 20 years, there is this idea on the table. Are we going to get rid of it and say, no, we're not going to a referendum? I don't think that this is wise to question the idea of referendum. The difference is that in 2004, there were referenda. The leadership at the time was not in favor of the result of the arbitration by the United Nations. In 2017, it was clear that only an agreed solution would go to referenda. So the leadership had to agree on the settlement, and this settlement would go to separate referenda. Personally, I'm really confident that if you have the leadership and the negotiating teams agreeing, it will go through without any problem.
I agree, but
you're afraid.
I am afraid that we will never get there. So what I propose, if and when it happens, is to put a deadline to these ongoing talks. Why do I feel confident that this can fly? Because we have already established a lot, as we have been trying to explain. We are not in 2004. It's not the period of unemployment where there were lots of gaps and that had to be filled by the United Nations. No, it's almost there. So I'm not afraid to say, allow ourselves a time limit and engage if there are still some outstanding details, some kind of a deadlock resolving mechanism or arbitration, so that we can finalize it. I don't want the new attempt to go on for decades because of one excuse or another, or because of one influence or another, or some interested parties. I don't even know who those might be. So once we push the button, we should commit to finish it by a certain time. I believe when we do that, it will be in our interest to help each other instead of relying on an arbitrator to finalize everything. But we should have that insurance of an arbitrator. If we still fail to wrap it up, then the arbitration mechanism, not a single person, but probably a mechanism, should finalize the thing. And we tell people. And this time, there must be some kind of a consequence on the part that says no. And I believe this is what we should, leaders should be talking about now. How do we design this? What kind of a time limit is reasonable? What kind of an arbitration mechanism makes sense? And what kind of consequence would be just to tell people that if you reject what has been put in front of you by your leaders, supported by the leaders, as a result of almost 60 years of negotiation, if you reject this, then
what do you think?
No, this is a point of disagreement, as you know. And you know, I don't want to talk about the divorce, the terms of the divorce. This is a point of disagreement, but I mean, at the same time, you know, Oždíl is absolutely right that we might have only one more go, one more attempt, and we need to do whatever we can in order to make it happen, to finalize it. But my fear, if you like, is that we need to make also sure that there is no failure, because as NASA says, as you know, in the United States, failure is not an option. Because if we fail, I don't want to think.
I have, by the way,
it's enough, I think. Huh?
Wait. We covered most of it. I want some comments, more relaxing conversation now. So these two guys both cried in 2017 when the conversation stopped. So it's very emotional topic, and they spend a lot of their part of their life and their energy to do this, which I admire. But I was just talking with my teacher yesterday. We were in the plane coming from Brussels.
Teacher of?
My teacher is physics. He was the teacher, and now we're working together in the European Parliament. And we were saying, what if this stuff never happened before? We were with the Turkish Cypriot community. We never fought with Turkey, and it was our rival and our enemy. And we had both Greece supporting us and both Turkey supporting us, the close power to us. What if we're going to be using both the Turkish Cypriot community to get stuff from Turkey as well and be cool? So it was like a good feeling, and like we did this to us, and we limit ourselves and our potential with all this stuff. It's interesting.
But you're absolutely right. It would be fantastic. It would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And imagine the potential of this place.
Not only for us, also it's by its implication for the region. It would be
imagine, you know, it's and not only, if you like, in terms of you know, economic interest, but imagine that you have people that get along very well. So that what unites us, it's much, much stronger than what divides us. And not only between the communities in Cyprus, between the people in Cyprus, in Greece, in Turkey, in the broader Middle East area. You know, we are people that can be beacons of hope for humanity.
Okay, last question before we go. How was the echo after the previous meeting that we did, the live event? Did you have good comments? What was the...
I think so. The following day, we participated in this Model UN meeting. There were many young people from both communities, and they were coming and talking to us, congratulating, telling us how much they benefited from following the debate. And later on, from other circles as well, that the people appreciated that we were, trying to explain and what happened. So I got positive feedback. I don't know.
Me too. I got a lot of positive feedback. But there was one which was quite emotional. It was several weeks after. I met a young man who told me the following. It's the first time that my generation is not excluded. For us, this was something very remote, negotiations and talking. We were feeling that it was having nothing to do with our lives. When I followed, he said, this podcast, this meeting and through internet, for the first time in my life, I felt that I was included, first time in my life. And then I also understood and appreciated what you have done in terms of personal commitment and how tough and difficult it was. I was really moved. A young guy was telling me, I appreciate what you have done, this effort you provided. It was the first time I heard this in my life.
It was very beautiful. My mother was saying, I admired that they were not fighting. They were waiting for the one to finish and the other to start. They were respecting each other and all this. And I got hope from this. And people, because this happens in the TV and all this stuff, but now people consume information in a different way, and the younger and all this stuff, so you can get all the ages of all. So yeah, it was amazing, and yeah, I thank you for doing that, and thank you for doing this as well. It's very important to continue this conversation and try, because transparency, I think, will bring more trust and ultimately more positive to this direction that we want to go. I love you guys. I love you people for watching. And for the international audience, this was probably very interesting as well to see how a small island is trying to fix its long-lasting problem.
Thank you.
Peace and love.